Whether you operate one forklift or thousands, one location or hundreds, the new My Toyota customer portal can help you optimize your operation and material handling equipment. This one-stop, free-to-use platform is designed to help you take control of your information and make smarter decisions, all at the touch of a button. Register and access your data today at my.toyotaforklift.com. That's my.toyotaforklift.com.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
Hi, and welcome to the New Warehouse Podcast. This is Kevin Lawton, your host. This week, I am joined by Derrick Miller, who is the Enterprise Solutions Manager at the Raymond Corporation. You guys may remember recently we did an episode with the CEO of the Raymond Corporation, and we talked about optimizing before you automate. And now we're going to dive a little more into some of the other functions that Raymond has. We're going to talk a little bit about labor management and labor management systems today. Derrick is the Enterprise Solution Manager at Raymond Corporation, and he is their labor management expert, labor management system expert. He also is a former employee of Easy Metrics, which you guys may remember in one of our very first episodes, we had the CEO of Easy Metrics on to talk about labor management as well and tracking metrics as well. So Derrick is certainly qualified as an expert in the field. So Derrick, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being on. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself before we dive into the topic?
Excellent. So I work for the Raymond Corporation, as you mentioned, in the iWAREHOUSE division. And the iWAREHOUSE division is really where we house a lot of our advanced technology solutions, labor management being one of them. Mm-hmm. And, I've been at Raymond for about 2.5 years. And as you mentioned, I was at Easy Metrics for roughly 6 years before that. So I've been working in the labor management space for about 8.5 years now. I've done everything from working with implementations to post-implementation success, both on the operations side and the customer success side as well.
Okay, great. So definitely you have positioned yourself as an expert on the topic. So why don't you tell us a little bit about labor management and labor management systems and exactly why a company would want to get themselves involved in such a system?
Yeah, perfect. So in concept, a labor management system is really any effort to track your labor, your productivity, your utilization of your employees. I think where a lot of operations struggle is that they've got an idea of how the facility might be doing or their operations doing as a whole. But really, if they wanted to get to any level of granularity, they really struggle. And it's because of a couple of things. It could be because of lack of data. It could be because of the level of effort it would take in order to get that level of visibility. But what a labor management system really is designed to do is to help people get that granular level information all the way down to the employee level in order to make sound operational decisions. So that in concept is how it works. From a practical perspective, most labor management systems rely on data coming out of your various systems, whether it be a warehouse management system, a telematics system, maybe it's an access database. Regardless, any data that tells me what people are doing, what their products they're moving, how quickly they're moving, that's the type of data that a labor management system would tap into. I think the goal with a labor management system and why people want to use one today is that kind of operational prowess. So in most facilities, you may not have much visibility into how Tina is performing over Tyler, where a labor management system will allow us to understand exactly the content of their work, exactly how quickly they're doing it, were they highly utilized, were they a top performer, were they a bottom performer. And really, if you can give visibility into individual employees, once you have that level of granularity, you can roll it up and look at your operation in any given way, whether it's by the process, whether it's by department, whether you're looking at it for last month, for yesterday. Really getting all the way down to that employee level allows you to really look at your operation from any direction.
Definitely. So now What about in terms of, and obviously, getting to that granular level helps you with the saying that Raymond has with optimize before automate, because you need to capture that data on that granular level to be able to optimize to the full extent possible. So what industries are typically using labor management system? Obviously distribution, manufacturing, I would imagine, but where else are you seeing it used as well?
Yeah, good. So to your point, warehousing and distribution, manufacturing have been, at the leading edge of who's using labor management. Mm-hmm. And I think the real cause of that is that they're throughput focused. They've got data systems that are tracking employee activity, and they're a labor intensive environment. So that's one of the main reasons why they were early adopters of the system itself. But really, there's nothing stopping any industry from using a labor management system. So If you think about it, anything that's labor intensive, whether it be a call center, maybe you're working in retail, you've got over the road trucking, maybe it's even in food service, anywhere where you've got labor working with products, working with throughput, trying to get, do more with less or more with the same. That's a good environment that a labor management system could apply. I think the natural step when you look at those operations is, do they have data to support a labor management system? So, from a call center perspective, there's all sorts of data being collected in terms of the calls, call duration, success with whether those calls, whether you met your objectives on those calls. From a retail perspective, there's cash registers, there's RFID technology. Yeah. So as long as there's data to support it, any real labor-intensive environment could use a labor management system and apply it in one way or another.
Definitely. I think retail too is a big one because, as we start to see the fulfillment model kind of shift and we start to see almost a distribution center become part of some stores as well with customer pickup and in-store pickup and all those different things, I think, that's a real point for labor management as well as you start to kind of utilize that retail space in a little bit of a different way in terms of distribution as well. Now, what ways?
Oh, that's right. There's definitely Oh, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, definitely. And so in what ways do you see companies benefiting from the labor management? So obviously we talked about, getting that granular data to help you optimize. But once you get that data, data is great to have, but you need to be able to take that action with the data. So what do you see when you start to implement these labor management systems, some of the, I guess, maybe low-hanging fruit that companies start to go after, and then overall, long-term, what type of benefits are they seeing?
Sure. So I think, if we were to look at a labor management system and break it into a crawl, walk, run type approach, right. One of the first things that I think people get immediate benefit out of is what we call missing time or unaccounted for time. So you might have a situation where your laborers are being paid for 12 hours, they're there for a 12-hour shift, but data only supports 9.5 hours or 12 or 10 hours of activity. So one of the immediate low-hanging fruit is really understanding what's happening during that 2-hour period of time that we have no visibility into it. And that usually falls into one of two buckets. The first bucket is they were doing activity, but we weren't tracking it. We didn't have visibility into it. So perhaps it's a process that's not being tracked from a systems perspective. Maybe they're doing box making or unloading a container, whatever that might be. They're doing value-added work, but we don't have any operational visibility into it. So getting that visibility is one piece of the low-hanging fruit. The second component of that missing time is true unaccounted for time, where we've got laborers who are perhaps being paid around the clock to be moving product out in and out the door, but they're just not being productive. Right. So a lot of times I think people think of a labor management tool as strictly chasing after productivity, but the first step that we always go after is this concept of missing time or unaccounted for time.
Okay.
The second component that we always go after, and that's kind of the walk of the crawl, walk, run, is reducing your indirect activity. So there's a lot, anywhere between 15 and 40% of your total paid hours can be related back to indirect or support functions. So activity that may be necessary to a certain extent, but it's really, again, not as value added as you might like. So you're going to have to do a certain amount of it, whether it be housekeeping, cleanups, whether it be support functions, clerk work, that type of activity, but you want to minimize that. So what we've been able to find is that the second layer of value is being able to take that from, say, 35% of your overall spend down to 25% of your overall spend, and getting a reduction there. You're either reducing the amount of total paid hours that you're spending in those areas in general, or you're repurposing those hours and getting people on task to drive that productivity and getting products in and out the door.
Okay, that makes sense.
The run, so the crawl, walk, run the crawl, walk, run would then be the productivity and the utilization play. So really making sure that now that we've got people working on the right task. Now we've got people working on tasks that we want to maximize that productivity. And that's done either by setting realistic stretch goals in terms of productivity, or as a manager, it's understanding what's causing a decrease in productivity and removing those barriers for your employees, so that way you can drive productivity up by optimizing your processes.
Okay, definitely.
There's a couple other areas that people are getting value out of it as well. So if you understand productivity, you understand how people are performing, how your operation is working, that allows you to help start doing labor planning. So with the labor market being as tight as it is, people are using this traditional historical labor management data to understand what their baseline productivity is, and that helps them project how many temporary workers they might need for tomorrow or for next week. That allows them to dial it in, so they're not bringing in too few, which means that they're behind the curve in getting product in and out the door, or they're bringing in too many people where you've got people standing around. So trying to find that just right when it comes to how much labor you're pulling in is really important these days. And being able to use your labor management data from a labor planning perspective has been very valuable.
Definitely. I totally agree. I mean, I think, you have really good points there in terms of, quantifying the time that it's taking for people to do. I mean, you mentioned something like housekeeping and within the warehouse and stuff. And I know from my experience as a operations manager, I mean, sometimes you send somebody to collect the trash or do housekeeping, and it seems to be a open-ended task for them, and they seem to kind of disappear for a little bit. So being able to kind of track them more closely like that, I think is huge. And like you said, catching that missing time and then being able to allocate those resources more efficiently, especially with the competitive market that you mentioned, I think that's huge as well, because you end up sometimes you bring on a group of temps maybe for a week or something, and then maybe there's 1 week where you're slow, and now you have all these extra guys, and you got to cut them for the day. Maybe they don't come back because they didn't get the hours or something like that. So being able to plan that out better, utilizing this data from the labor management system, I think is really, really key to running a tighter operation and a smoother operation.
Yeah, that's right. And I think another area of value is once you understand the amount of labor you need, cost of that labor is getting your head around cost to serve. So, what does it actually cost me to do a put away versus a replenishment? What does it cost me to do that unload versus that load? In most cases, because you don't have pre-LMS, because you don't have that visibility down to the process level, down to the people level, you really have you might know that your facility is winning or you're losing from a financial perspective maybe last week or last month. But what did it actually cost me? Am I winning or am I losing on my put away? And so that's a value add from a labor management perspective that I think most people don't think about, which is if I know what my people are doing and I know what my people are paid and how fast and productive they're being, I can start getting my head around at a very granular level what it costs for me to run my operation overall. And that helps facilities focus on where they do process refinement. It helps facilities decide where they're going to make investments in technology and all sorts of things once they have that cost visibility.
Right, definitely. I think it gives you that visibility, like you said, and you can focus on where you need to optimize that. And so when you utilize that labor management system, it helps you to start to optimize and see where are those gaps, where are we missing time, where can we improve on time, all those different types of things. So how does the labor management system itself contribute to the overall optimization? And then how do you know you've, I guess, maybe exhausted the findings of the labor management system to realize that now you need to take the next step and move into some type of automation for whatever process it may be that you're focusing on?
Yeah, so that's an important concept. So, and that's going back to the optimize before you automate. And I think that message is really critical in that most people, I think, when they think automation, it's a light switch where, I didn't have automation today. Now I want automation tomorrow. Let's do it. And the reality is they're basing their decision on whether to automate or not based on, how they're performing today. But the reality is can I optimize my labor force, and maybe to the point where I no longer need that automation whatsoever? Can that be done? And that's where a labor management system comes in. You want to be able to refine and get everyone dialed in as much as possible, and then use that as your baseline to make a decision with whether or not you're going to automate or not. One of the things we've found is that even when you move towards automation, it tends to be a gradual process. And so a lot of times you're introducing an automated forklift or a conveyor or some system, but you're introducing that around your labor force. And so what you would then do from a labor management perspective is use that as a before and after measurement tool. So how was I performing before I made this capital investment in automation? How am I performing afterwards? Did my cost per unit go down? Did my man hours in the particular function go down? If so, how much? And really being able to monetize that investment, where before, if you didn't have cost visibility, if you didn't have productivity visibility, you really, you made the investment and you hoped that you got a return on that investment, but there was no way of quantifying the return on that, specifically as it comes to complementing labor. Labor management system, especially cost to serve reporting, allows you to do that.
Definitely. And I'm curious, actually, as you're talking about that, if you have ever seen any correlation between like manpower productivity going up once automation has been enabled, kind of maybe in a sense the workers getting a little worried that the automation is going to replace their job. Maybe they start to work harder a little bit. I'm curious if you've ever seen anything like that.
We'll be back after a quick break.
You hear a lot about supply chains these days, because if the past couple years have taught us anything, it's that an efficient, well-managed supply chain is absolutely critical to keeping businesses successful and consumers happy. I'm Will Haywood, and I host a podcast called All Business, No Boundaries, where we talk about supply chains, how they work, what happens when they don't, and the innovations that are redefining what's possible in the world of logistics. Join me for insightful interviews with thought leaders and industry experts. We discuss how optimizing supply chains can break down the barriers that are holding businesses back. That's All Business, No Boundaries by DHL Supply Chain. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah, so I think we see employing a labor management system in general. Oftentimes we see that bump because start with now I'm being tracked, and now I have that my managers have that visibility into my individual performance. So we see a bump there. When conversations, yeah, exactly, and for good and for bad, right? So just like it's most people think of LMS as an accountability tool only. It's also an incentive tool as well.
Definitely.
But what we find too is that when people start talking about introducing technology, you do see a slight bump in productivity if that person's particular work area may be impacted. And sometimes that's for the better. A lot of times technology is being brought in to remove the hardest part of an employee's job. So, if maybe you're bringing in an automated forklift to do a 1,000-foot run that just goes back and forth all day, and that was being done by a person, and it was a particular element of their job that they didn't enjoy. So what we've seen is that when you do invest in technology, a lot of times it's making the employee's job easier, not necessarily eliminating the job, but making it easier. And we can see a bump in productivity in some of those more motivated employees when that happens.
So now we talk about automation, and then, we talk about, I guess, the warehouse 2.0, right, and all these different things that are coming in, and Internet of Things and things of that nature. So how can the labor management system, I guess, interact with the automation, Internet of Things, and then how does it also retain the value once you start to reduce that labor force based on replacing tasks, like you mentioned, with some type of automation?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So maybe I'll take it back to a comment I made earlier, which is a lot of times the power of labor management is based on the data that's available. So you can have a higher level labor management solution if you've got fairly simplistic data or data that's being captured manually. You can have a pretty granular and nuanced labor management system if you've got a more sophisticated data set to tap into. So from an Internet of Things perspective, it's really opened the door to enhancing labor management, because now all of a sudden you've got all of this data that you never had access to before. Everything's creating data. Your forklifts creating data, your automated RF readers, your conveyors. Before, maybe a conveyor only moved product, but now it's scanning the product along the way, and it's producing more and more data. So what we've been able to do is actually tap into those additional data sets and provide enhanced granularity to some of our customers that didn't have that granularity before. And so we actually look at Internet of Things as being a very promising data input from a labor management perspective. When it comes to bringing in the automation is creating data similar to some of the Internet of Things technologies. And what we've been able to do is actually start looking at the automated tools and start almost tracking them alongside people as if they're people. So now, you might have Tina or Tyler who are doing their picking activity, but you might have an automated forklift moving alongside them. Yeah. That forklift is still generating data similar to the person, and we can actually start quantifying and measuring that piece of equipment as well. So, I think that long term, we're going to see that employees are going to be working alongside this automation for an extended period of time. I don't see there being a total removal of the labor force.
Definitely.
So with that said, I think LMS is around for the long haul, and because we've been able to start tracking some of this automated equipment and pulling in the additional data sets, what we'll probably find over time is that LMS will morph from just a standard labor tracking tool to a kind of a business excellence and operational overview tool. So you're going to start getting visibility into some of this equipment, some of this automation that you've invested in, not strictly labor. So the labor management is here. What it does for the operator will probably change over time.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it does transform, especially as more automation comes into play. And I agree with you totally. I don't think that we're looking at the, I guess, dark warehouse, so to speak, for quite some time. I think it's still going to take some time to get at least the collaborative automation going with humans as well before we get to that point, if we ever get to that point. So definitely labor management, I think, was here to stay for a while. So one of the things, just like we talked about earlier, data, having data is great, but you need to take action against it. So now in terms of labor management systems, and I'll say from experience, I worked for a company where we had a labor management system in place, and we had it in place for a long time. And I will say it was definitely underutilized. I don't think it was fully adopted and embraced by the company as a whole. That's probably part of the reason why it was underutilized, and we could have probably got a lot more out of it. So from your experience, what would you say are steps to take in creating, I guess, a successful labor management solution, but also a successful implementation of it, and then carrying through with what its intended purposes were?
Yeah, sure. So I think from an implementation perspective, what's really important is that you start by scoping the software in a way that's going to make sense to the operation. So there are some solutions out there or some approaches out there where we say we're going to come in and just say, today you look at your operation this way, but when you install this labor management system, we're going to show it to you that way. We're going to force you to square peg, round hole. Yeah. In terms of the data that we're going to be presenting to you. So it's unfamiliar. So I think one of the most important things as part of the implementation is really working with the operators from day one to make sure that the scope and what they're getting at the end of the day after the implementation is complete aligns with how they view their operation today and how it makes sense. So it's something familiar. So I think that's key from an implementation perspective. I think afterwards, though, one of the biggest challenges with labor management is the change management afterwards. So it's not enough to create a system that provides you with reports put the reports in the hands of the operators and hope they do something with it.
Yeah.
What we've found is that you need a fairly robust change management program, that crawl, walk, run that I talked about earlier. I think, that's an experience that a labor management solution provider needs to go through with the operators, not just tell them about it, but actually walk through the process with them, make sure they understand, this is how you did it yesterday, this is how you can utilize data today to do it better, faster, make it easier for you in a more consistent manner. So we've toyed around with how to best do that. And what we've found is that, it can be anywhere between a 3 months to, 12-month process with working alongside the operators to make sure that, they're using the reports on a daily basis and that they're getting a lot of value out of it. Because there's a lot you get out of an LMS. So if you just strictly use it to measure productivity and hold people accountable, and that's all you use it for, to your point, the product can be underutilized. So we find that, that extended duration after the implementation is complete is really important. And then we're doing quarterly check-ins, right? So, every couple months we're going to have a review to make sure that what we've gained over that year time we haven't lost and that we're not slipping. Or if you get new management in, that they really understand the value of the system and what they can get out of it. Natural turnover happens with the management team, and what we don't want is to have all of that experience walk out the door, and next thing you know, you've got a labor management system that's not being used.
Yeah, it just kind of dies, right? So, and I think you have a good point too about you're saying, putting a square peg in a round hole. I think oftentimes what happens in companies, and I've seen sometimes happen too, is that somebody is tasked with saying, all right, go. We need a labor management system. We should have a labor management system, and they send somebody to go get one, but that person maybe really doesn't have experience with them, or they're not the one that's really going to be utilizing it, and they just go get one, and it's not really the right fit, like you mentioned. So I think that's a really good point to make sure that you get all parties involved who are especially going to be utilizing it, like you said, the managers, and make sure that you understand what they're looking for and what they understand they need as well. So what do you think are some myths about labor management systems? I think, from my perspective, my experience, I would say there's definitely the employees that will now be, more watched, as we were mentioning before. I think, obviously there's, I guess, some fear from them sometimes. But like you said too, I think it's also the ability to create incentives for them as well, which can be beneficial for them. But what are some other myths, I guess, that you've run into, and how do you kind of work around those and kind of get those out of the minds of people?
Yeah, so I think the biggest one is you hit the nail on the head. The biggest one is this idea that it's strictly an accountability tool, and that it's not. Right. People don't look at it from a incentive tool as well. The idea of a labor management system is measuring fairness in a fair way as much as possible, and usually in a way that's much more fair than any other traditional method of tracking. So that's one of the biggest myths, and we've been able to dispel that myth in most cases by involving the employees early on. So instead of keeping employees in the dark about the fact that this tool is coming, letting them know in advance, letting them be part of the conversations, raise their concerns, and get those answered in advance have been really powerful with dispelling that particular myth. I think another one that we run into is the idea that this data can be obtained in other ways. So whether it be a warehouse management system that gives you lines per hour or pallets per hour, the myth is that, that's sufficient enough data in order to manage your people. And I think the reality is that, we have to be looking at multiple variables in order to really determine whether or not it's fair. Box size, how much travel did the employee have to do? Was the box heavy? Did they have to go to 10 locations versus 20 locations? All of those variables need to be taken into account. And I think the myth is that information resides in other places. And it does to a certain extent, but not to the degree that you get out of a labor management system. And I think the third big one is just, the status quo, which is, I've been doing operations for a long time, and I know what's happening out there automatically on my own. I can go out there and walk around, spin a circle, and really understand the health of my operation. But the reality is that These facilities are big.
Yeah.
There's the management ratio to employees and managers are getting larger and larger, and managers are in the front office working on special projects half of their day. Mm-hmm. And so needing a system that really allows them to get visibility into their operation is critical. And I think that myth is that, a person and their experience is going to be able to tell you as much or more than data. And not to sell that short, but I think the data complements their experience to run a solid operation.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think that, if you're going out and you're saying that I just know what's going on and you're not really looking at the data, then I think you're missing. I mean, maybe, you can get a feel definitely for what's going on, but at the same time, I think you're missing a lot of opportunity to improve in that sense. And I think the other myth that you mentioned too about, kind of equalizing the work in, just basing off lines per hour or something like that, you do miss a lot of stuff. And I know, from personal experience, there was a huge debate that I went through because you have, people picking small orders, and then you have people picking orders that are full pallets and takes a lot longer to do one than the other. But you're quantifying something that's 500 pieces as one line, and then you're quantifying something that's 2 pieces as one line too. So it's totally different thing. So to be able to drill it down and be able to break it apart like that with all the different components of that action and task, like you mentioned, I think is a huge thing. And I think overall that even gives the employees more of a sense of fairness, because, when I went through that debate, the debate was, well, I'm not getting as many lines because I'm picking larger orders than this other person is. And, without the data in those small, broken out, components of the task, you can't really argue it, and you can't really show them why you're doing it that way. So it puts you in kind of a tight position. So I think that's really good myth that you pointed out there.
I call that the but scenarios, where if using the traditional method, if you're just working on lines an hour and you approach a teammate who maybe, I'll use the word appears as if they're underperforming, there's but I had a weird ratio of my quantity versus lines, or I had to travel all over the place. Yeah. And an LMS really helps you eliminate those buts.
Yeah, definitely. I think the but scenario that you talk about as a manager is always it's always a difficult thing to say, and or a difficult thing to deal with, because when they say but this is happening and that, and then if you don't have like the data that an LMS would give you, it's hard to kind of prove your point and back it up what you're saying. And you go back to just that, having that feeling like you mentioned before. And always that's not always so satisfying to the employee, I would say.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, definitely. So you talked a little bit about before, where you think labor management system is still going to be in place even as we move towards more automation. But how do you think the technology overall and labor management systems will kind of evolve over time as we get access to more things technology-wise? Do you think that we'll be able to get even more on a more granular level and even enhance optimization even further?
Yeah, sure. So I think the first step in the next 10 years is that we're going to just see more and more people using labor management. If I rewind to 6 or 7 years ago, very few people were using labor management. Everyone kind of understood that the tool was out there, but it was still, I would say, under-adopted. Where now what we're finding is that most people are realizing, especially in this labor market, that they really have to get their head around cost control of labor. They really have to be able to do more with what they're able to get in terms of labor. And so we're finding that there's a lot of people looking to invest in this technology. And I expect to see that over the next 10 years to grow in a huge amount within the warehousing, distribution, manufacturing space. Mm-hmm. But I also start seeing that over that 10-year period of time, that we're going to start, as I mentioned a bit earlier, we're going to start seeing some of the technology cross lines into other business sectors. So again, the call center environments, the retail environments, we're going to find that labor isn't just a problem within the warehousing and distribution space, but it's a problem across the board. and people are going to start wanting to manage their operation using data so they can operate leaner and meaner. And I think that's going to be something that we see moving in the next 10 years. I think another big thing, too, and I think that we've struggled with up until this point is labor management systems oftentimes only show you operational information about your single facility. So if you've got 10 sites, you've got 10 different labor management systems, instances of labor management running, but it's required some level of manual work to get that cross-site, multi-site, your business network visibility. So I think what we'll find an enhancement in labor management is really being able to say, how do I get from looking at, Carl, my individual employee at site 7, all the way up, rolling it all the way up to seeing how site 7 is doing against site 5 and 3. And so that large network analysis, I think, is going to be kind of a next step in labor management, which is being able to benchmark individual sites against each other without having to do that in a manual fashion, which is how most people do it today.
Yeah, that's interesting, I think.
And then I think the final...
That gives you kind of the opportunity to now take continuous improvement learnings from a different facility as well. So if a different facility is performing better in an area than the other one, then you can kind of take a look at that and say, like, oh, well, what are they doing different? And maybe we can have some shared learning there.
Industry benchmarking is going to be a big thing in the future as well. Once you're able to pull data to the degree that you're introducing all that new data from the Internet of Things. You've got the data that already exists. Now you can start taking this from a big data approach and saying, what is the industry trend? Am I benchmarking against people in my industry, in my sector? And using not only your own internal benchmarks, but benchmarking against other people in the space.
So now tell us a little bit, I guess before we wrap up here, tell us a little bit about the labor management system that Raymond offers through iWAREHOUSE, correct? So how does that work? And if you already have Raymond machines, how can you easily kind of start to implement that into your operation?
Certainly. So the one nice thing about our labor management system is it is system agnostic. So we can come in and you don't have to have a Raymond forklift in order to use the Raymond LMS product that we provide.
Okay.
So in fact, you don't have to have forklifts at all. If that's the case, you have plenty of applications where maybe people are picking on carts or whatever that looks like. But simply put, what we would do is we would come in and look at your operation and really understand, is this an application for labor management? Is this, do you need the level of tracking? Do you have data that can support it? Do you have areas that need additional data collection? We've got methods of doing that as well. And if there's a good fit there, then the process is similar to what we talked about before, which is, we would go through the implementation process. We would get you up and running on the system, and then we'd be there to hold your hand over the next, 3 to 12 or however long you need months to make sure that you're successful on the product. So it's a product that we've been offering for a couple of years now, and we're finding that there's a lot of interest in it.
Okay. And that's all under the iWAREHOUSE umbrella, or is that a different system?
Nope, that's all under the iWAREHOUSE umbrella. So under the iWAREHOUSE umbrella, we offer real-time location tracking, telematics, automated forklifts, LMS, basically anything that's a technology product outside of the forklift itself falls under the iWAREHOUSE umbrella. And the labor management system is one of those products that we offer. A lot of the systems talk together. A lot of the systems can operate on their own as well. So it really just comes down to the customer need, what problems they're trying to solve, and finding a product that best fits their need.
So where can people go to find out more about, I guess, Raymond in general, and then also find out more about the iWAREHOUSE suite?
Yeah, certainly. So the best way of doing that would be to find us online. So you can find us at raymondcorp.com. And you could also find us at the iWAREHOUSE Technology Solutions. There's a website called iWAREHOUSEknows.com. And either of those sites can direct you towards our technology products. We've got a page for every product. You can certainly also, if you're in the field, you can contact any of your local Raymond sales and service centers, and they'll have the right point to contact to make sure that they either answer your questions. And if you've got more advanced questions around the product, like labor management, you'll probably end up talking to me, and we will work from there.
Okay, awesome. So we'll post all that information on the newwarehouse.com as well, so you guys can easily access it. And we'll have some more information about labor management systems and also iWAREHOUSE there too. So, Derrick, thank you so much for being a guest on the New Warehouse Podcast.
You've been listening to the New Warehouse Podcast with Kevin Lawton. Subscribe and check us out online. at thenewwarehouse.com.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want more content from the New Warehouse, check out our new video series called All Hands on LinkedIn. Just search for the New Warehouse on LinkedIn and follow along.